Good afternoon. Today, voters have a clear path to vote on term limits in the November 2026 elections for the office of Comptroller and County Executive. The Board of Elections, the County Executive, and the County Legislature have agreed on a process that maintains the Legislature's desire to let voters decide. The agreement also addresses the County Executive's request for a second ballot question that gives both County Executive and Comptroller more time in office. The County Executive has made known that he prefers a term limit maximum of 16 years in office compared to the local law the Legislature passed allowing a maximum of 12 years in office. Although that measure originally failed in these chambers when it was introduced, in negotiations, an agreement is more powerful than an argument. I will now be introducing a local law that offers what was agreed upon in negotiations to ensure the term limits question will appear on the ballot in November. I thank Judge Lamondola for his time convening all parties. The agreement and path today demonstrate we had to engage the courts. There was no legal pathway forward without the court. This pathway was only possible because the court agreed to waive the missed deadlines for a ballot proposition and allow competing questions to move forward. This decision enables the submission of a new local law for consideration. This new local law will supplant the previously passed term limits local law, include 2 competing ballot questions, one for 12-year term limits and one for 16-year term limits, proposes term limits for the Comptroller and County Executive, must be signed into law by the County Executive if passed by the Legislature no later than September 9th, and clearly states that whichever question receives the most votes becomes the law. Let me make it plain. We chose you, voters, not a lawsuit. The Legislature began this work establishing its own term limits last year, and it was difficult then. Throughout this entire process of bringing term limits to the remaining elected county offices in 2026, we have seen 6 corresponding laws be introduced. Legislators have consistently stepped up to say, we hear you, we will make this work. A law that changes the charter by the voter's voice is not the only way, but it's the right way to do this. Today, we also brought a critical protection. An agreement signed by all parties confirming that the actions of the Board of Elections Commissioners do not constitute precedents. The courts made it clear, if this ever happens again, there will not be mediation. The courts will intervene. Per the court agreement, I'm sponsoring the new local law with competing ballot questions. It supplants the previously passed local law on term limits. I will direct the new law to be placed on legislators' desks later today for consideration on September 1st. I urge my colleagues to vote yes to advance it to the County Executive's desk and bring this chapter to a close. I also urge the voters of Onondaga County to go to the polls on November 3rd and remember their legislature fought for them. Lastly, I want to thank our voters for speaking so clearly and so powerfully.
Chairwoman Watts, the County Executive says this was never about him and that he wanted a bipartisan solution. Do you agree with that characterization?
I think we all want bipartisan solutions every time that we are considering any legislation because we serve the entire county, no matter what people's political affiliation is. However, it was clear with 2 vetoes, or at least one that actually went through and one that was intended, that the voters' voices, which were loud and clear in support of term limits, were not taking the priority in the conversation.
Earlier today at 11, the County Executive also alluded to this maybe shouldn't have ended up in the courts to begin with. Is there any comment response to that?
As I mentioned in my comments previously, there was no pathway forward without involving the courts. We followed the legal system, and there was truly no option in our charter for us to have done anything differently than we did. So the only way that this path was made possible was because of the courts.
These 2 amendments are somewhat closely what the County Executive proposed himself a few weeks ago, except for the start date for this. So was that ever under consideration by your caucus or the Republican caucus about introducing these two measures together?
So, as you may remember, in this process, we considered both of these referendums separately, and during the time when we were considering them both separately, I personally asked the question, what happens if they both pass? We voted on them on the same day. That was very viable all the way until the votes had been completed, that they both would have passed, and they both theoretically could have ended up on the ballot at that time. Due to the way that we were understanding it at the time from the Board of Elections, that is, first of all, that's certainly not common practice, and secondarily, that would not have worked because that local law would not have had the which one wins clause in it, because then we could have had theoretically two different referendums being added to the charter. So it needed to be in the same local law to make this possible. The only reason why anything can go on the ballot is because the judge is doing something here. So when you may have heard the county executive mention it, I know he had mentioned it to the media, the conversations had already happened at the legislature regarding that. It was not actually a viable path forward without the courts. And so the courts had to get involved in order to make this possible. That's the important piece. And without this, it would not be on the ballot. We would not have it on the ballot this year.
You're saying that you're urging your colleagues to vote on this. So this isn't a guaranteed solution,
Correct.
right? It's not
Yes.
voted
So
on
it's
if it doesn't happen.
It's a negotiated agreement, and so all four parties that were involved in this have signed off on the agreement, but all four parties have to continue to hold up their part of the agreement in order for it to stand. So the first step will be the legislature to pass this local law. The second step will be the county executive to to approve the local law. The third step will be for both Board of Elections commissioners to sign off for it to go on to the ballot. All four parties have said that they will do so in the negotiated agreement, but the agreement will fall apart if any one of those parties do not continue, and that puts us back at ground zero.
Chairwoman Watts, did the legislature have to give up anything to get this settlement? And when that is answered, also, a lot of time was spent on this, a lot of energy was spent on this. It doesn't have to, it can be figuratively. Did the legislature have to give up anything to get to this point here today?
So for me, one of the things that I continue to want an answer to, and we will continue to try to pursue it through different means, is what happens when a Board of Elections commissioner does not place something on the ballot. The only way that we could have gotten that answer fully adjudicated through the courts would have been to go to trial. And so that remains to be a thing that I am hopeful that we can work with other entities to get clarification to ensure that no such thing ever happens again.
And also, the relationship that the Board of Elections has now with, this has, put us on the map a bit in terms of the term limits dispute, also nationally. Is there a path forward, moving forward with Onondaga County government? Are we ready to put this behind us? That kind of statement.
I think this agreement is very much an effort on all parties to put this behind us. We have really important work to do as Onondaga County. We are headed into our budget season, which is one of the most important seasons in terms of the two branches of government, legislative and executive, working with one another. We have some very important budget priorities that we need to work together to make actually possible so that the people of the county can get what they need. And so absolutely, the hope is that this negotiated agreement will give us a resolution to the current situation, the only path that it could have possibly been resolved through, and for us to then be able to continue. We've been working on county business all along, but to continue to do that and be able to focus all of our energy on that moving forward.
Assuming this ends up on the ballot, and there are a few steps yet, what will the messaging be to voters from either the executive branch, which I know you can't really speak for, but the legislative branch, because this could be potentially confusing for voters, looking
100%.
at, competing proposals.
And that was one of our greatest concerns when we were considering this throughout the journey. However, the 12 will go first, and so voters can know that the 12, the smaller term limit, the shorter term limit will be first on the ballot, and 16 will be on the second listed on the ballot. So we have that clarification of what order it will show up so we can communicate that to voters. And then it's just a matter of just making sure that the voters understand what happens to vote yes on the one they want and no on the one that they don't. There is not. The only way that there would be no term limits is if neither of the referendums get enough votes to be the majority vote.
Can you explain the negotiations? I know that there was a lawsuit between Zarni and Ryan, and then County Executive McMahon had a lawyer who filed a motion. Did you guys have a lawyer? Was it the whole legislature showing up to negotiate? Can you just talk to how?
We did. We did secure an attorney after the county executive entered the lawsuit. The judge requested that we have representation in the judicial conference at that time, and at that time we secured Steve Williams, who was also representing Dustin Zarni separately.
What happens to on the Ways and Means agenda? There's a term limit proposal from Hotel. Is that pretty much off the table now?
At this time, they are choosing to leave it on the desks, and I will leave it to Legislator Kelly and Leader May to speak to that in Ways and Means next week.
What is the minimum number of votes? Do you know that yet?
That is, in legislation, that is an ever amorphous number, so we need 9 for it to pass.
And then at the ballot, assuming again this goes to voters, what's the majority that?
A simple majority.
Simple.
Right, so a simple majority vote. Mhm.
Does it matter the margin? I mean, if you both things pass and it's yes to vote, when you look at the margin of it, or is it just whoever has more yes votes?
The way that the legislation reads is whoever has more yes votes, and that the other will be discarded at that time.
Sorry, so voters will have to vote yes on one and no on the other, or will they have just to vote for one?
Yes, so the voters get to choose, right? So if a voter doesn't care which term limit amount, then they can vote yes for both. But whichever one gets the most yes votes, assuming that they are over 50%, is the one that will get enacted, and the other one will be discarded, essentially.
I just want to it is important to know that Board of Elections is a part of this agreement, so they are prepared to do what they need to do to make sure that voters understand how to answer the questions.
What if it ties?
That is a great question. That is a bridge we will cross if we get there. It is extremely unlikely for that to happen, but yes.
Just want to make sure I understand, so we don't confuse that, because I'm thinking about like a ballot, right? So like, what if I'm somebody who doesn't want to run its own, like that's not an option, you have to boot or boot.
You can say no, no. No, no. If you don't like them at all, you can vote no, no. If you like them no matter what, yes, yes. If you want 12 years, like me, I'll go to the ballot, I'll be voting for 12 years.
So there's a path that neither of these would pass. It sounded in court that whoever got more votes, there would be term limits. Yes. The question is it going to be 12 or 16?
That is based on the assumption that they will get majority vote based upon the fact that we know the public is very broadly wanting term limits. The only way there aren't term limits moving forward is if there's under 50% of the vote on both of the referendums, which is extremely unlikely.
Background, when would this go into effect? What term or for what election?
It would be the election on 2030 with a start date of January 1, 2031.
2031.
And I'm sorry if this is already been answered,
No.
but like the current county executive or person in that position, comptroller, are they grandfathered in, or does the clock start?
The clock starts no matter what, no matter who it is, on January 1, 2031.
Okay, thank you very much. You have a press release and a copy of his remarks in your office. Thank you. And if you are not on the media list,